I'm standing here, but that's a very broad team effort. So I'm having a double act with Leyla, but still there's many more people who are involved in this. I will run through this because a lot of ground to cover, and I want to focus on two results and a bit of the methodology of this. And Leyla will present one type of the results that we want to focus on today. The Corporate Tax Haven Index, CTHI, ranks countries by their contribution to global corporate tax avoidance risks. And it complements the Financial Secrecy Index, which is more focused on individuals and on the broader set of concerns far beyond tax. The CTHI is focused on multinationals tax avoidance, and it's covering at the moment 64 countries. It is constructed in a similar way than the SDFSI is. It has two components, one Haven score and the global scale weight. The Haven score is a measure of intensity of how much a country is enabling and how aggressive a country is enabling corporate tax avoidance. It ranges from indicators you can see on the left-hand side chart, ranges from issues such as tax holidays and economic zones up to controlled foreign company rules. And we are grouping these 20 indicators into 5 categories, which are equally weighted. The 5 categories are the ones that we want to talk about. I want to focus on the results. The LACIT is the lowest available corporate income tax rate. So first category. The second is loopholes and gaps, transparency, anti-avoidance, that's the other one where we are going to focus on in the results, and then double tax treaty aggressiveness. If you paid attention in the first session, my colleague Lucas presented some of the results from that last indicator in the very opening session. This is combined then with a measure of extensity, how much is a country actually used by multinationals. We use a proxy. As a proxy, we are using bilateral FDI stocks reported by the IMF. We construct a global total of that, and we use a country's share of the total as the global scale weight. We combine those two datasets in the same way we combine the Financial Secrecy Index datasets. And we arrive at an overall ranking. Now let me say a few words about the LACIT, the first type of category and indicator that I want to focus the results on later on. We have seen a number of the presentations, I think I counted 4 at least, in the last 2 days that had charts or graphs of corporate income tax rates and how they were falling over the last years, that they were used by a number of people. Everybody that works with those data sets probably knows about the constraints these data sets are having. They are often relying on OECD data sets. It's the top statutory corporate income tax rate that is mainly used. They are often very misleading. Take the example of Malta. Malta is often reported as a 35% CIT rate country, but it has enshrined in law automatic reimbursement of that corporate income tax paid if it's paid out to shareholders. So you get back the tax that you already paid. So it's a 6/7 is reimbursed. So we actually use for the LACIT, we use a 5% rate instead of the 35% rate. And this is where we have 11 adjustments for that lowest corporate income tax rate that we are proposing. I want just to explain maybe the most controversial ones, maybe just focus on the step 3 in this slightly complicated looking chart. The first one I already mentioned, we disregard distribution or retention of profits. Estonia or Latvia are the opposite of Malta. They only tax if it's distributed. Then there's adjustments for the type of company. The Swiss holding regimes are falling into this, but also Montserrat still has an IBC regime that exempts the IBCs from the normal, otherwise applicable taxes. Territoriality, for example, Hong Kong does not tax active business income from outside of Hong Kong, which there's academic evidence, articles that show how this is actually used by Canadian corporations investing in China to avoid any taxation for their Chinese profits. And the fourth adjustment we are making is the unilateral tax rulings. This is where we have in-depth investigations by the European Commission into state aid cases where, for example, Apple and Starbucks, etc., were shown and in-depth analyzed and documented with a lot of paper and charts and calculations in how they paid not 15 or 25 or 30% of tax, but only 0.02 or whatever percentage of tax. We are using that tax ruling data on the ground that we assume that other multinationals are able to access a similar low tax rate against the background of all the countries not having backtracked from those rulings. They're still providing those, and they are even fighting it at court. So now let's move to some research findings. The top rankings, these were hopefully seen by you in the media or elsewhere. The top 3 countries highlighted in blue here is every country controlled by the UK. The top 3 countries are BVI, Bermuda and Cayman Islands, or UK-controlled satellite corporate tax havens. And the next 3 are European countries. The next chart, this is very hard to read, but the blue color should do the trick. It's the same coding. The blue color indicates controlling by UK, controlled territories, and the right chart is basically a ranking not by the corporate tax haven index value, by the combined value, but only by the haven score. So only by the intensity of the aggressiveness of a country's policies. And you see that out of the top 10 countries, you have 8 which are British controlled. If we now take into consideration that the top 10 have an average, the top 10 on the left-hand side, the top 10 countries that are also in that ranking, the top 10 combine a 40% of the global total foreign direct investment that is recorded by the IMF. And those top 10 countries have all corporate income tax rates, as defined by our LACIT, of 3% or lower. You can see how broken our corporate tax system globally is at the moment. Now, a few more results on the LACIT. This is just the gray dotted columns are basically the top statutory rates. You see here the greatest discrepancy for Netherlands and Switzerland, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Hong Kong. You can see that the actual LACIT that we calculated, these are the colored charts for Netherlands and Switzerland, are at 2 and 3%, and for the rest of the top 10, they are 0, basically. Now you can do a lot of interesting charts, tell a lot of interesting stories for the different categories. For example, this is for the loopholes and gaps. You can see how each country is comparing against the best performer, etc. You can do this, and we only want to do this with anti-avoidance rules now, at which point I hand over to Leyla.
Thank you, Marcus. And base erosion and profit shifting policies require implementation through unilateral actions such as domestic legislation or administrative regulations, and or bilateral or multilateral actions via international treaties. Under the anti-avoidance group, we examined unilateral actions taken. The group consists of 5 indicators. First 3 are deduction limitation for 3 types of payment scenario, i.e. interest, royalty, and service payments. And fourth one is withholding tax for dividends, and the 5th one is controlled foreign company rules. When we look at the graph, we see that Europe performs better than Africa in deduction limitation for interest and service payments. Meanwhile, Europe performs worse than the OECD average in controlled foreign company rules. As a matter of fact, the EU countries had to transpose CFC rules because of the anti-tax avoidance directives, shortly ATAT. And 15 out of 28 member states hadn't had any CFC rules before the ATAT. Now they all have CFC rules. Then why their performance is low? Because the ATAT introduced 2 options for the sake of flexibility. One is weak and the other one is strong. And several member states introduced weak rules and lowered the average of Europe. When we collectively consider unilateral measures recently taken, the corporate tax haven index indicates a tendency towards unilateral actions that goes beyond the OECD BEPS project. And look at the US example. And US new reform has introduced the BEAT under the basic mechanism of new measure. The certain deductible payments to foreign affiliates, such as royalty, interest, and service payments, are added back to the taxable income. And the modified taxable income is subject to BEAT. And Poland and Greece have introduced a service payment limitation as well as royalty payment limitation similar to Austria and Germany, South Africa, and Tanzania. And Netherlands, they are planning to introduce a withholding tax on interest as well as royalty as of 2021. However, the corporate tax haven index also shows us how exception weaken these unilateral actions. Even if 48% of index countries have introduced a fixed ratio rule to limit interest payment, to limit cross-border interest payments, the corporate tax haven index shows that 81% of them weakened those measures by creating loopholes via a group ratio rule and or a financial undertaking exclusion. So in sum, when we compare all 5 corporate tax haven categories, Europe has much work to do since it is the worst performer in 3 of 5 categories. When looking at best performance scores, we see that the greatest distance from ideal score are in transparency category, indicating that in this category most policy innovation is needed and or courage of first movers is needed. So if you go to the Corporate Tax Haven Index website, you will see the full ranking and summary reports. And moreover, technical reports of individual countries are available in open data format. So thank you for listening.